The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
It is our prayer that the true business of our meetings and works will be our spiritual transformation and the transformation of others through us and through our ministries. We ask this of you as we now begin in the name of God, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Once again, thank you all for joining us. We are so glad that you are here and for taking the time to be with us this evening. We are not having the best of weather this last couple of days. It's been a little damp and blustery, but I'm sure it is nice weather for somebody somewhere. But I'm glad that you are here with us. I'm Stephanie Gurnsey Higgins. I'm your Minister for Diocesan Development and Giving. Now you get to see into a little corner of my home just north of Richmond. And Julie.
Yes, hi, I'm Julie Simonton. I am your Diocesan Minister for Stewardship and Congregational Development. You get a peek inside my home and you might see shadows passing back and forth here as my two grade school girls get their supper and settle in from school for the evening. And I am here from the south side. The Diocese of Virginia breaks at the James River, which runs through Richmond, and I actually live on the other side of it. So hello from technically the Diocese of Southern Virginia. We're really, really glad you're here. So we want to welcome you to our third conversation in our new Church Vitality Now webinar series. Stephanie and I have wanted to launch something like this for a while, and we're so glad you have joined us for it. We look forward to this week's conversation and to hearing from you as you feel free to use the chat function and the Q&A function, to hearing from you what would be the most helpful for your ministry and your church. As we move into what we have planned to share this evening, we'd like to offer a few notes on how our time together will work. Our conversations are richer because you are here. And it is so helpful for us to know who you are. So thank you to those of you who have identified yourself and said hello through the Q&A or through the chat function. Your questions throughout the evening are very welcome, and the ministry work you are offering at your church is also important for us to hear so that we may respond in the future even more fully. So please let us know about that. As we work through the webinar, please use, like I said, either the chat function or the Q&A format to send us questions or to describe what's working at your church. If Stephanie or I is talking, the other will be watching the chat and the Q&A, so don't worry about interrupting the flow of the conversation. Just go ahead and right away. Many of the questions we'll be able to answer for you directly during this webinar. If the question is really church specific, we will gladly take your information and be in touch with you separately. If the question is too large to answer completely here, we will do the best we can in the time that we have, and then perhaps include it in a later webinar. This webinar will also repeat tomorrow, Thursday at 9:30 in the morning. It will, of course, not be the same because different folks will be joining us, but we will present the same information. So please let others know about it. We'd love for them to join us. And one last note is that you will all likely hear many ideas that resonate as possibilities for your church to pursue. We suggest that you choose one idea, maybe two. This way you won't burn out yourself or others, and you'll know what works. And finally, we will be grateful for your experience and ideas about what you would like for us to discuss during future webinars. We will be holding webinars throughout the summer, and how we might structure our time together in different ways here that best address your ideas, questions, and where you're finding Jesus in your church and community. So please don't hesitate to be in touch with us during or after the webinar with your thoughts. And our emails will be coming up soon in the chat for you to either use now or use in the future, or pass along to other ministry leaders in your congregation for them to be in touch with us about specific ideas. All right, so I am going to share our screen before we launch into the next section. Hang on just a moment. All right. Now I will rearrange my screen because that always reconfigures the way we see everything. Give me just a second to do that. And we will move into the next section. There is our opening prayer in case you enjoyed it and want to use it. It is from the New Zealand prayer book. So, in today's webinar, we will discuss where churches are likely finding themselves now and best practices for current giving right now. How to plan for a fall giving campaign of holy agility, which means having a variety of possibilities prepared so that you can respond with creativity. We'll look at some of our favorite digital resources that we hope will become timely and dependable sources for your ministry too. And finally, we will tell you, we're so excited, cue the joy you see on our screen. We will tell you about next week's webinar with a guest speaker who is known within the Episcopal Church and across many denominations in the United States as a gifted and insightful voice in congregational development stewardship. So I can't wait to tell you about you stay with us so you hear more at the end. All right, so Stephanie, are you ready?
So before we get started though, we're going to take first few minutes for a quick review of our previous two webinars, which will set this week's discussion into context. If you would like to hear the entire conversation for either webinar, you can find the recordings on the Diocesan YouTube channel and also posted on our Stewardship and Development Facebook page. I talked about the giving curve, which is here. It's based on data from folks who research nonprofit fundraising during crises. It includes the three talked about where we are in this curve and best practices for healthy stewardship. The giving bump is larger and has lasted longer than anticipated. Donor generosity has been high, and we should be very thankful for that which people are willing to give, because this is a real gift to us, because we will get to phase 2, a slump. This is a period of less than normal giving, and even if your congregation is doing a great job, you will likely still be raising less money for a while. Probably about 6 months based on current projections. But this is our opportunity to tell good news that's happening around us and show how you're pivoting to navigate challenges in your community. Just be sure to let people know what you need so that they can also help out. This is where we really move from the sprint to the marathon, because we're no longer in that initial shock of the crisis, and it's not also business as usual. You're going to need to still send more communications, not less, and still remember to provide ways for people to give financially. They may not be able to give as often or as much because of limited personal resources, but we don't get to make that choice for them. This part of the curve will take up much of our time, and we'll be using all of our best practices to keep everyone engaged. But keep in mind that even if we see less revenue, it's normal. It's not a value judgment on the work we're doing. We need to keep up the good work because we will get to the surge and the new normal. This will happen when the economy picks up. But you also see that there are two different lines, and they tell two very different stories. The bold line shows a dramatic increase in giving for the organization that kept to their best practices and deepened relationships. There are going to be many different pathways to recovery here. For some of us, it might look more like Netflix. We made a quick transition to digital space, and folks sat on their couch and got comfy with us. Or we might be more like Home Depot, where we made adaptations to the way we fulfill our ministries. We went online slowly. We figured out how to meet the needs of our community. So we have a slower recovery, but we are going to get there. But what we don't want to be is a cruise line. People who haven't figured out a way to pivot from the fundamental way that they do their work. So we're going to continue to have these conversations. We're going to continue to talk about the best practices, and we're going to learn from each other because we're going to be dealing with these challenges together. You can find the article I referenced posted on our Stewardship and Development Facebook page, the Diocesan website, and the link will be here in the chat. Julie?
Thank you. The details in this giving curve slide are difficult to read depending on what kind of computer you're working with, and we know that. We did a cut and paste from the article link. So if you have a chance, read the article in full. It is a wealth of information and something that is important, I think, to pass along to a number of leadership ministers in your church. And it will give them a good bit of comfort, but do know that those details are available in a way that will work better digitally if you go directly to the link. Mm-hmm. All right. All right, so in review quickly, last week we explored the relationship between transactional stewardship work and transformational stewardship work. While a part of our work indeed is to do with formatting pledge cards and tracking numbers and figuring out metrics, at its heart, our call is about discipleship and how we use the gifts God gives us to do the work God calls us to do. Last week, we discussed best practices in telling the story of relationships with God, ourselves, and our community, and how this relates to the work we do with our fall giving campaign. We talked about how we can coach other ministry leaders in this work, and that the more generous your church's ministry leaders are in relationship, the deeper the community is in relationship with each other and with God, and the more generous they are in response. Last week, we also discussed being in touch with your more generous givers, those who often help in a specific crisis, to talk about the possibility of a financial concern in your future, something that might come up that you don't know about yet. And asking them then, if something happens that you don't know, that isn't on the table yet, if something happens, do you have their permission to be in touch with them later and ask for their help? That way you can check in, see how they're doing, and establish that a conversation might come later and they allow for that a conversation to happen in the future. If you would like to hear more about this, check out the webinar from last week or get in touch with Stephanie and me about a deeper conversation for all of that. Stephanie.
Yes. So now we're going to talk about giving now. Previously, when I talked about the giving curve, I explained that many nonprofits experience a bump in giving at the beginning of a crisis. This bump occurs for many reasons, but especially because people are truly generous and they want to make a difference. It also happens because people are scared and they're feeling anxious and they're seeking to establish control in their lives. And giving and doing both provide us a sense of agency. But we've had some people ask, what happens if we didn't actually see a bump? In the early days of the crisis, the nonprofit sector seemed to split into two different camps. There was direct services like healthcare and food banks and human services. These organizations were overwhelmed by surges in giving, almost beyond their capacity to process, which has really ended up being a good thing, actually. And then there were those who didn't feel their organizations were as urgent or as critical as those who were in a direct crisis response for basic needs. And that second group generally believed it wasn't the time to contact donors or ask for money. We need to remember that there's pent-up energy to be involved and take action. We can harness that. People want to be involved. In fact, when polled, 75% of donors expect to give the same or more this year because they know that there is a great need within the organizations they give to. In that same poll, 90% of organizations expect their income to go down. So clearly there's a substantial disconnect here. Remember, it's okay to talk to people about money. It's not the first conversation we want to have with people, and that's one of the things we've talked about over the last couple of weeks. Our parishioners are here for us. When they give to your church, we want to show our authentic gratitude. And later on, don't forget to ask again. So if you didn't see a bump, here's a couple of questions. Did your giving continue as normal? Did your giving actually decrease? If your giving continued as normal while you pivoted from in-person worship to digital live stream worship, you reached out to your parishioners and checked in with them, and you offered a way for them to give online, I'm going to call that a win. You're establishing your best practices that will be part of what you need for the work that you'll be doing for the upcoming future. Your bump might be that your giving stayed consistent. There might not be a bump within your community, and there are some real reasons for this. First, giving can be consistent. In fact, it can be maddeningly consistent. When you try to get people to raise their giving, they're still consistent. Even through the Great Recession, which was the biggest economic downturn we've seen since the Great Depression, many people didn't stop giving. The dollar amount they gave may have changed if their income decreased, but most people gave a consistent percent of their income, even during hard times. Because giving becomes a habit, it is a good habit. So even if the economy is hit hard, some people will not change their giving behaviors dramatically. Consistency of individual giving is so clear. It's been this way for over 50 years. Drops in giving are not as great as overall economic drops. So even when the recession lasted 8 months or longer, giving only declined 2.7% on average. So, did your giving actually decrease recently? If so, were you pivoting from in-person worship to digital live streaming worship and reaching out to parishioners and checking in with them and offering a way for them to give online? If so, then your context may be experiencing some considerable difficulty. If, however, you are still working to establish your church community beyond your church building and put your best practices in place, then I think we might have your answer. People didn't stop giving, they stopped giving to you, and probably because you stopped reminding them of the good work your congregation is about. There are a few points of research that show us real declines in giving following the economic downturn in 2008. The first being the number of givers has actually been decreasing for the last 2 decades. And that has actually happened, we know, in churches especially. We know our average gift amount is rising, but the loss of donors is real. Also, major donor giving, the people whose giving is most strongly correlating with the rise and fall of the stock market, that was substantially hurt by the economic drop. And so this is something we'll need to keep an eye on this year. And another unusual statistic, postal mail volume in 2008 and 9 actually dropped 13%. Now, churches aren't great about asking, thanking, and reporting back to givers and pledgers, and this probably didn't help keep and steward our donors during this time. So let's also be careful about the way we are connecting with people. If people are used to getting things in the mail, we need to probably continue to give them their mail. So what do we go from here? We need to do what we need to do. We need to check in with parishioners often. We need to find out what they need. We need to tell them what we're doing. We need to focus on what they need to hear and what they want to hear about. How are you helping people in your community? This isn't a time just to show need, but it is also a time to show your relevance. Are you worshiping together as a community? Obviously, you're not worshiping together in your building, but even if you're not producing a virtual worship that your congregation is with together, are you all viewing the same service together? This can be comforting because it brings you together to have something that you are all part of. If you are holding virtual worship, think about the roles you usually have in your building when you're together. You have a greeter, you have readers, you have a preacher, you have musicians. You can have all of these same roles when you worship virtually too. We've talked about having a greeter in your Facebook and Zoom worship chats. Julie and I do it here for each other. It models hospitality and it engages your visitors, helps to steward them into your community. It's also a great way to have your parishioners volunteer for you, keep them engaged. And if you have not done it yet, provide a way for folks to give online because you have to have a way for them to give you your gifts. In the month of April, e-commerce providers had more traffic every day of the month than they experience on an average Black Friday. It's phenomenal. We have to have online giving. You can continue to use the Diocesan online giving portal very easily, and I'm glad to help you with this process. The portal is now available to our congregations through the end of the summer at least. If you've been using the portal and it's working really well for you, you might even want to consider an electronic giving platform for your continued use. We have information on the COVID resource page, and I'm glad to have that conversation if we can be of help. Also, people want to know how your congregation is meeting the needs in your community. We know that there was a precipitous drop in employment that came, and that meant for many immediate needs needed to be met. We know that schools not only scrambled to teach children, but also figured out how to feed them. Has your church been part of meeting these needs? And if so, be sure to tell that story. Have people been dropping off food or checks to help buy gift cards for others? Be sure to thank them, obviously, but tell the story of how people have been helping. You don't have to use their names, but telling the story helps others know what is possible and shows that y'all are meeting real needs for your neighbors. Because people want to know what you're doing so they can be involved, so they can be the hero of the story. They want to feel good and engaged in the work, and you get to help them. You want to show the donors that they're valued. It's important that they know that you value their gift and it's getting to those people that need it. So you can continue the asking, the thanking, the reporting, all parts of that virtuous cycle. through multiple platforms, however you engage with your congregation, electronically or through the mail, through social media. Incorporating those ministry moments that are often part of our annual giving cycle into our virtual worship and regular communications. This doesn't mean we're going to do a verbatim transcription from one medium to another, but it means that we're going to tell that story on a platform in the best way possible. We also want to show people that we're innovating. We want to demonstrate how you have adapted your approach to the current situation and that you're providing ministries from a physical distance in a way that is protecting your staff and your community. Remember to thank people who make your virtual worship possible, especially if this is a new role or a volunteer. Parishioners will realize it doesn't appear if by magic if you help them understand and maybe even incorporate them into the worship process. Let folks know how your ministries are carrying forward, how new ministries have been established for your congregations now that you're not worshiping in person together. Because we can't assume that they know everything that's going on in our virtual communities. Many of us, it turns out, are doing more, not less. So if you didn't get this bump, don't panic. We know that we need to use our best practices. We've talked about many today. We will talk about more going forward, and you can hear others that we've talked about in past webinars. We're gonna also hopefully hear some of yours as we have additional conversations on our Facebook page. You're also going to want to increase your relevance. People are anxious in this uncertain time. Do your best to be relevant to the person and the time, tying your part of the story where you are to the people who give to you, not just the why, but the why now. So what would it look like in the world without your congregation, without your church? What do you need right now to keep that work going? What are you doing for the community? How do you bring your neighbors hope? Because relevance is about adapting to your community and to your parishioners. You'll need to change the stories you're telling as your community is changing, as the worries of your parishioners are changing, to reflect your context and your people. This is vital, and you know them best. And as our world changes, everything we talk about will need to change. But keeping in contact with people, this, I can't say it enough, reaching out through phone calls, we know that that's one of the best ways to increase future giving, sometimes as much as 40%. So keep checking in on folks. Keep saying thank you for their gifts. Continue to ask what you can do for them, but also let them know what they can do for you. Except for some areas that may be incredibly hard hit by unemployment and the coronavirus, which are circumstances entirely outside their control. Right now, we need to remember that we have everything we need. God gives us everything we need. We may experience life as scarcity, but that's not because God hasn't given us enough, but because we haven't put to use the things that God has already given us more than enough of.
Thank you.
Julie.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we're going to move into a section on holy agility, and we will talk about this in two parts. The first is the practicing of holy agility within your congregation's leadership. The second is preparing to be agile with your annual giving work in the fall, which I know is on the minds and hearts of many of us. We do have a plan to help you navigate what to write in your communications for the fall campaign. However, before you decide where to go with this in the fall,
You as leaders will need to continue to do the spiritual work of knowing where you are, how you got to that place, before you know how to get to the next place. Stephanie and I have seen brilliant work in our churches about naming this new normal. So what we're encouraging now is establishing some metrics to help track it. We have created a document available on our website that gives you the 3 possible paths that you see here on the screen as a check-in with your leaders. We suggest using these at least once a month, beginning now, and using them in different leadership settings. For instance, with your vestry, if you have a stewardship team, and with any other specific ministry groups. These questions and reflections offer a consistent way to check in individually. They also function as a narrative metric for how and where the Holy Spirit is working in your congregation and in your leadership. With whichever one you choose, listen for where the Jesus is in your congregation and community, and ask, where is an opportunity to move deeper into our story? Where does our ministry team sense a call to pivot in a new direction? And which of the stories that we're observing are repeating themselves from month to month within the observation of our ministry teams and leaders in our churches, and with other folks with whom you have conversations? As you engage in these conversations, have one person at each gathering responsible for leading the conversation and recording the notes. Be mindful to set a specific amount of time for group discussion as well as for individual responses, because these can be powerful and engaging questions, and we want to make sure that everyone is mindful of the time that you have for this part of your gathering. So the first suggestion is one that Stephanie and I heard about a year ago from Sam Wells, who is the vicar of St. Martin in the Field in London. And he asked these questions: where am I rich? Where am I poor? Where are you rich? Where are you poor? And you can extend that to your congregation. Where is your community rich? And where is your community poor? If you choose this one, it allows you the opportunity to consider how you, others, and your church are called to be God's currency in the economy of God's kingdom. How are you God's currency in God's kingdom? The second one offers the opportunity to explore our baptismal liturgy. This also highlights the theme for our upcoming Diocese of Virginia annual giving program, which is called One, and which comes from these opening words from our Holy Baptism Liturgy. You can engage your leaders, if you choose this one, on how this passage speaks to how your congregation is one with Christ, one with all people, and one with creation. The third is from our beloved prayer after baptism, and offers the opportunity for a practice, if you choose, of Lectio Divina, where you listen to the passage several times, and each time you hear it, you listen for which words are engaging you, and you can track it, because if you try this in June, the words that you hear that give you energy or give you urgency may be very different from the words you and other leaders hear in July and in August. And as you track the way this spirit moves through your leadership and those with whom you're engaging, you can track and take a metric of the narrative within your congregation and where God is calling you. Again, these and the ways to use them are on our website on a document on our stewardship page. Next, as you begin and continue to organize for the fall, here are a few thoughts on where to begin. Now, keep in mind that preparing for this fall In our urgency over the pandemic, and our urgency over the economy, and as in the US, we're preparing for a presidential election, preparing for annual giving with all of these different calendars layered on top may not be what we call fun, but it can be deeply engaging, rewarding work, and it can be where we find all sorts of Jesus we didn't even know was there, just as we are finding all sorts of Jesus in ways we didn't know as we have moved into digital and virtual worship and gathering. So our suggestions for you as you begin to think about the fall: first, create a flexible plan by June 30th so that you have a direction to head. A plan always lowers everyone's anxiety, and one that is agile allows you to move in an assortment of directions while still moving forward. Our suggestion: usually our annual giving campaigns are 6, sometimes 8 weeks. Our suggestion for this year is for it to be about 4 weeks. So plan for a shorter campaign. Also, consider scheduling your ingathering of pledge cards before the election. That will allow you, your ministry leaders, and your clergy to be available for your congregation in a textured time. You want to be free and not working to continue getting letters out and getting things done. You want to be free to minister to your congregation and minister to them where they're finding themselves. Regardless of which way the election goes, it will be textured and you need to be available. Also, even though you have the ingathering in October before the election in November, have a plan to continue the conversation of vibrant ministry and where the vitality is in your congregation. Continue to plan to do this through November and December. Keep up with your storytelling, keep up with your gratitude and saying thank you, and keep up with your well checks as we navigate these next few months. And do this so that if you and your clergy or ministry leaders decide you're open to bookend your annual giving in January, let that part be a part of your plan. We often see in January us getting in touch with the folks who normally pledge who haven't, but let that be a part of your joyous plan this year. People are going to be uncertain about how the taxes are going to come out, what their returns are going to come out, what it's going to look like once we move into the new calendar year. So make January not a, we're going to capture the last folks. Make January part of your joyful plan. Also consider getting in touch with some of your more generous and faithful givers. We will cover this a little bit more in detail in the annual giving webinars in June, but begin to think about inviting some of your most faithful, generous givers to offer a matching pledge. So perhaps they want to give the same amount that they pledged last year, but they want to give an extra gift, and you can use that extra gift as a matching pledge so that you could say in the fall or in January for this fun, joyful push, if you increase your pledge or if you give a new pledge, it will be matched dollar for dollar by some of our faithful, generous givers. This is also an opportunity for you to work with your endowment committee if you have one. Sometimes these matching gifts in churches come from the endowment. We're not sure what endowments are going to look like by November. So our suggestion is to go ahead, have that conversation with your generous and faithful givers, and consider having a matching portion of your campaign. We'll talk more about that later. Another thought, My experience with stewardship ministers is that there is always so much information, particularly over the summer, that you want to share with your vestry members, that it's difficult to condense all of that in the, say, 5 to 10 minutes you have at the vestry meeting. So now that we're in the digital world, consider having a video that goes out before the vestry meeting, and that video is a part of the consent agenda. I know many vestries in the Diocese of Virginia use a consent agenda, the things that normally take 10 or 15 minutes of a vestry meeting that you can send out electronically. Everybody can say, yes, that is right. And then when you get to the vestry meeting, you actually have more time to have a fruitful conversation. So consider doing just like we are here with Zoom. Have what you want to say, record it on a video. You can show some different slides. Send that out to your vestry ahead of time. Allow them the chance to absorb it. Say, yes, I get it. We're okay with that. So that with your 5 or 10 minutes that you might get in the vestry meeting, you can try one of the conversation prompts from the previous slide. And that'll give you a chance to really consider the narrative of where you are and where the Holy Spirit is moving. The last point we're going to make, and this will also be a part of going deeper into annual giving, is to begin to review and craft different writing prompts. This will be a part of our annual giving materials this year. And what I mean by that is that quite often, the pledge letters that go out have a certain area that they cover. But this year, you're not necessarily going to know if your annual giving letter needs to have more pastoral care in it, if it needs to have more urgency in it, if it needs to respond directly to needs in your community. So we are going to offer a variety of different writing prompts so that as the message shifts between now and August when you begin writing, or September when you begin to send some of your communications out, you're not scrambling at the last minute in an urgent place of saying, oh my goodness, we see these things happening, we don't know how to express it in our pledge and stewardship information. We're going to give you some writing prompts for that you can craft specifically for your culture and context in your community. So be ready to review those when they come out and begin to think about how you might want to communicate your value and your needs and your urgency and your stories in the fall. Okay. So lastly and quickly, a few notes here. Stewardship ministers often receive a lot of the anxiety from vestry members and from others in the community about how the stewardship campaign is going to roll out in the fall. And these are just some really handy responses to have in your pocket that will lower the anxiety of the folks who are talking with you, and can also lower your anxiety so that you have some helpful responses and aren't caught off guard. So these are just some handy things to either say on the phone if you happen to be seeing someone at a physical distance in person, or if you're receiving some emails. Thank them, and of course ask them how they would like for you to be back in touch with them once they've expressed what they're thinking, what they're seeing. Be sure to ask if they want you to be back in touch with them. Right. And then finally, the questions to keep on the table for your stewardship ministers, for the ministry leaders in your congregation, is to always keep on the table, where do we want to move deeper in conversation and relationship? Where do we want to pivot? What are we hearing? So you're going to hear specific bullet points, for example, from different folks who have concerns, who have creative ideas. What are you hearing? And then what is the subtext of those conversations? So what are you hearing, and where are you listening deeper into the conversation for where Jesus is? And all of these, as you gather them through the month, is something that you could convey in your consent agenda to the vestry, so that once you have a chance to have the conversation with other leaders, you can move deeper into what you're hearing. Thank you, and we will switch back to Stephanie now.
One of the best ways also to be agile is to know that we don't always know the answers, but to know where the answers are. Julie and I have created a document available on our website That includes many of our favorite resources. It is by no means exhaustive because we're constantly inspired in new ways. We're going to keep this resource current as we encounter new favorites. And we, as always, invite you to send us yours too, so that we can share the wisdom of so many who are involved in this good work. We're not going to go through all of these detail by detail, but we do want to highlight a few that may be new to some of you. I only got to pick 3 to talk about, which was really hard. But I do want to talk about the Nonprofit Marketing Guide. Kivy Miller-LaRue puts together amazing work. I rely on the monthly writing prompts to help build out a month in social media posts. And the workshops are fantastic. There's a lot of free material that they put out, but there is also what they call their all-access pass. As it sounds like, you buy a pass for the year and you get access to everything. The first couple of years I thought, I don't need this, and then realized that with that pass I got everything, and that included the fact that Tom Ahern, who is one of the world's leading authorities on donor communications, does between 2 and 4 trainings with them a year. Those trainings are usually several $100s, and by the time I would have counted up attending those, it paid for the pass. And not to mention I could do everything and have access to the whole thing. So I have had the pass for a couple of years and I love it. Just this week there was a post on 7 ideas to help staff submit better photos. Not only was it tangibly helpful, but it really gave me several more ideas to go with. Another one we've talked about a little bit before, but is Canva. This is the graphic designer for folks who don't have a graphic designer. It's invaluable. I've been using it since it first came out. It was good then, and it's constantly gotten better. The best part is I never have to guess what size a post needs to be, whether it's for Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. Canva knows, even if the platform just changed the sizes yesterday. I can do my development newsletters there, whether it's digital or print. It's amazing. And I know that we've done things for our Facebook page, and it's brilliant. My third one is Horizons. They do stewardship and capital campaign consulting, but they are also doing a lot of really phenomenal webinars that anyone can take part in. I am probably on 1 to 2 every week right now, which is a lot. I'm probably only at normal times in one a month, but I would also highlight their Giving 365 portal, where they have an archive of material that's free to anyone. And they have been archiving all of the webinars that they have done since this crisis began, so that anyone can go in at any time to access that material. Julie.
I will also echo, I was jealous that Stephanie picked Canva because I love Canva. And if you have a file going on there, everyone can log in, you can create your content there together and organize it so that everybody can get to it in case someone's able to create it but not able to post it. Everyone can get in and access it. The ones that I will also recommend, and again, we have almost 2 pages of recommendations, so please go take a look. One of my favorites is Barna. It is a research organization that connects faith and money, and also takes a temperature of where the culture and context of the faith community is in the US. Their research is gorgeous. They always put it out in really easy to read graphs and pie charts, so it's not only content, but it's incredibly engaging. Another source that I really love is the Lake Institute. The Lake Institute is a part of the Indiana School of Philanthropy. It's been funded by Lilly, and they do research on the intersection as well of faith and money. Lake not only works within Christian organizations, but with all religions across the United States, and just does exceptional research and exceptional webinars and information on where we are and what we're seeing. reliable, wonderful resource, and they send out great monthly newsletters. And the last one I'm going to recommend, although there are so many to choose from, is the Consortium of Endowed Episcopal Parishes. That's called SEEP. You can be a member of SEEP if you have an endowment or are interested in pursuing endowment. You get additional resources through SEEP if you are a member. But their website is for everyone to use. They have brilliant webinars, especially in the response to the COVID crisis. The webinars that they are offering, from how to engage parishioners in stewardship to treasurers and finances and what's going on with the CARES Act. SEEP is a fabulous resource with some of the brightest, most clever folks across the US responding and hosting webinars. Check it out. Check it out. They are a fantastic organization. All right, Stephanie.
We're going to invite your questions here. I've been looking, I don't see any in the Q&A. Do we have any? I don't see any others that we haven't answered in the chat. Does anybody else have any questions as we are finishing up here?
I will quickly respond to one that came in by email recently, and it was a question about, and that we covered in last week's webinar as well as this week's webinar, about how to be in touch with your most generous givers, to have those conversations about asking permission for being in touch later in the year should you need to ask them for a specific gift. And then, as we talked about today, if you want to engage some of your most faithful and generous givers in a match. That is a broad conversation. It is usually quite specific to the culture and context of your community. Who is giving and how they are giving is confidential information, but each church handles that differently. Whether the clergy know, whether it's the treasurer, whether it's the stewardship chair, it really is specific to those individual communities. So how and who would go and ask those questions is something that Stephanie and I are really happy to discuss individually. We have a good bit of information about it. We will go deeper into that conversation with our annual giving webinars, but it is one of our most frequent conversations, and we would be really happy to talk through the culture and context of where you are, whether you have a new clergy, whether you have a longtime rector, whether you're in an interim. All of these different situations can really influence how and who and when and if you ask for those specific gifts. So that information is coming. If it is something that you and your leadership team are having a conversation about right now, let us know, and we will gladly schedule some time with you and the entire leadership team, if that's helpful, to talk through the possibilities. Stephanie, have you seen any other questions?
Yeah, we have a couple of them that have come in through the Q&A, and these are really good questions. These are broader questions. They're both are questions that we've actually talked about addressing as part of additional conversations. So I am going to say thank you for your conversations or your questions, and let you know that we are going to be talking about this in a larger context, because I think these are not things that we can answer in the next couple of minutes. But specifically, like, how does the fall campaign fit in with the projection of the giving curve? And especially the other things that we'll be laying, the other things that lay down on top of that. I think there's a lot that for us to unpack there. And other questions that we're getting in as well. So I do say that the other questions that we've gotten by email, we will be, if we don't have a chance to answer them here, we'll also bring them to the Facebook page, because we can have those very robust conversations there as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Stephanie, you want to talk about next week's webinar?
Yes, next week, we only have one webinar. It is Thursday morning at 9:30. Please join us here for Terry Goolsby from Horizons. And he will be talking about leading where you've never been before. He's going to share a framework for engaging your givers and elevating capacity to meet ministry demands, knowing that there are no easy answers, no turn-by-turn instructions. He's going to talk about a compass, but giving guiding principles to navigate this uncharted territory to achieve our ministry objectives. So please be here to for this time with Terry. We've talked with him this week, and he's got some really wonderful things to tell us.
We're really excited. And this one, normally we have our webinars on Wednesday evenings and Thursday mornings. Next week, it will be Thursday morning only. So if you've got folks within your church who have been logging in on Wednesdays, please let them know to schedule that for Thursday morning so that they can hear Terry. And of course, we will be taping this and it will be available on the webinar as well. I see one final question about holy agility. That is the term that we are using, and I think you probably will hear more about this from Terry as he's talking about navigating without a compass, about looking at the landscape and being ready to make a shift as you move forward, because what we think that we need to write for our fall giving campaign now in May is likely going to look very different once we get to August and September, just because we have so many variables. So what we are offering, and you will hear more about in June as we offer our annual giving conversations, is have a variety of possibilities ready to go so that you can be agile. Know that if you think you need a little bit more pastoral care, these are some things that you can say. Know that if you're going to need to go all digital, this is the way you're going to do it. Know that churches still respond really well to things in the mail. So even if you are still meeting virtually, how can you come together in a safe way, physically distanced, to get mailings out? So we're just going to talk about different ways you can continue to move forward, have all the possibilities available for you, so that when you realize you need to be creative in a different way, that is already there and it's not a crisis to rewrite a pledge letter. You've already got the tools that you need, and you can just plug it in and be agile and creative and give your leadership the confidence that regardless of what happens, you're going to know which way to head. All right, so we'll get more into that later. We are so excited to see you next week as well on Thursday morning at 9 o'clock with Terry Goolsby. Don't miss it. If you would like for others to hear what we've been discussing, you can point them to the YouTube and the videos if they want to catch up. And now in closing, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Eternal God of love, in you we live and move and have our being. Breathe through us again this new day. Give us the courage to be open and welcoming to your Spirit, that we may be led to do your will and follow in your ways today and tomorrow. Amen. Thank you, everyone. It's been great to spend the morning with you. We're so glad you're here. Have a great day and a great Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.